Good morning and happy Wednesday. We left off just as Harry, Ron, and Hermione were entering the bookstore where Gilderoy Lockhart was going to be reading and signing autographs. So, let's see. Oh, there you are. Good, said Mrs. Weasley. She sounded breathless and kept patting her hair. We'll be able to see him in a minute. Gilderoy Lockhart came slowly into view, seated at a table surrounded by large pictures of his own face, all winking and flashing dazzlingly white teeth at the crowd. The real Lockhart was wearing robes of forget-me-not blue, which exactly matched his eyes. His pointed wizard's hat was set at a jaunty angle on his wavy hair. A short, irritable-looking man was dancing around taking photographs with a large black camera that emitted puffs of purple smoke with every blinding flash. Out of the way there, he snarled at Ron, moving back to get a better shot. This is for the Daily Prophet. Big deal, said Ron, rubbing his foot where the photographer had just stepped on it. Gilderoy Lockhart heard him. He looked up. He saw Ron. And then he saw Harry. He stared. Then he leapt to his feet and positively shouted, It can't be Harry Potter! The crowd parted, whispering excitedly. Lockhart dived forward, seized Harry's arm, and pulled him to the front. The crowd burst into applause. Harry's face burned as Lockhart shook his hand for the photographer, who was clicking away madly, wafting thick smoke all over the Weasleys. Nice big smile, Harry, said Lockhart through his own gleaming teeth. Together, you and I are worth the front page. When he finally let go of Harry's hand, Harry could hardly feel his fingers. He tried to sidle back over to the Weasleys, but Lockhart threw an arm around his shoulders and clamped tightly to his side. There's no pictures on the next page either. You're stuck with my face. Ladies and gentlemen, he said loudly, waving for quiet. What an extraordinary moment this is! The perfect moment for me to make a little announcement I've been sitting on for some time. When young Harry here stepped into Flourishing Bolts today, he only wanted to buy my autobiography, which I shall be happy to present him now, free of charge. The crowd applauded again. He had no idea, Lockhart continued, giving Harry a little shake that made his glasses slip to the end of his nose, that he would shortly be getting much, much more than my book, Magical Me. He and his schoolfellows will be, in fact, getting the real Magical Me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure and pride in announcing that this September I will be taking up the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The crowd cheered and clapped, and Harry found himself being presented with the entire works of Gilderoy Lockhart. Staggering slightly under their weight, he managed to make his way out of the limelight to the edge of the room, where Ginny was standing next to her new cauldron. You have these, Harry mumbled to her, tipping the books into the cauldron, all by my own. Bet you loved that, didn't you, Potter? Said a voice that Harry had no trouble recognizing. He straightened up and found himself face to face with Draco Malfoy, who was wearing his usual sneer. Famous Harry Potter, said Malfoy. Can't even go into a bookshop without making the front page. Leave him alone. He didn't want all that, said Ginny. It was the first time that she had ever spoken in front of Harry. She was glaring at Malfoy. Potter, you've got yourself a girlfriend, drawled Malfoy. Ginny went scarlet red as Ron and Hermione fought their way over, both clutching stacks of Lockhart's books. Oh, it's you, said Ron, looking at Malfoy as if he were something unpleasant on the sole of his shoe. Bet you're surprised to see Harry here, eh? Not as surprised as I am to see you in a shop, Weasley, retorted Malfoy. I suppose your parents will go hungry for a month to pay for that. Ron went as red as Ginny. He dropped his books in the cauldron, too, and started towards Malfoy. But Harry and Hermione grabbed the back of his jacket. "Ron!" said Mr. Weasley, struggling over with Fred and George. "What are you doing? It's mad in here. Let's get outside." Well, well, well. Arthur Weasley. It was Mr. Malfoy. He stood with his hand on Draco's shoulder, sneering in just the same way. "Lucius," said Mr. Weasley, nodding coldly. "Busy time with the ministry, I hear," said Mr. Malfoy. "All those raids, I hope they're paying you overtime?" He reached into Ginny's cauldron and extracted from amidst the glossy Lockhart books a very old, very battered copy of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. "Obviously not," he said. "Dear me, what's the use of being a disgrace to the name of a wizard if they don't even pay you well for it?" Mr. Weasley flushed darker than either Ron or Ginny. "We have a very different idea of what it means to be disgraces to the names of wizards, Malfoy," he said. "Clearly," replied Mr. Malfoy, his pale eyes straying to Mr. and Mrs. Granger, who were watching apprehensively. "The company you keep, Weasley, and I thought your family could sink no lower." There was a thud of metal as Ginny's cauldron went flying. Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Mr. Malfoy, knocking him backwards into a bookshelf. Dozens of heavy spellbooks came thundering down over all of their heads. There was a yell of, "Get him, Dad!" from Fred and George. Mrs. Weasley was shrieking, "Oh, Arthur, no!" The crowd stampeded backwards, knocking more shelves over. "Gentlemen, please, please!" cried the assistant, and then, louder than all, "Break it up there, gents! Break it up!" So I want to pause for a moment. I want you to think about what you can infer that Mr. Malfoy and Draco are both inferring, or what they're both implying by saying, like commenting on the things that Ron's family can buy. So just kind of thinking how that might feel if you were Ron, and how that might feel if you were in his family, and just kind of what that would mean in general, to make those kind of assumptions about someone or to judge someone so harshly based on things that they're buying or the job that they hold or the things that they can afford. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I know this reading is more so just for fun, but that doesn't mean we can't still learn. Alright, break it up there, gents! Break it up! Hagrid was wading towards them through the sea of books. In an instant, he had pulled Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy apart. Mr. Weasley had a cut lip, and Mr. Malfoy had been hit in the eye by an encyclopedia of toadstools. He was still holding Ginny's old Transfiguration book. He thrust it at her, eyes glittering with malice. "Here, girl, take your book. It's the best your father can give you." Pulling himself out of Hagrid's grip, he beckoned to Draco and swept them from the shop. "You should have ignored him, Arthur," said Hagrid, almost lifting Mr. Weasley off his feet as he straightened his robes. "Rotten to the core, the whole family. Everyone knows that. No Malfoy's worth listening to. Bad blood, that's what it is. Come on now, let's get out of here." The assistant looked as though he wanted to stop them from leaving, but he barely came up to Hagrid's waist and seemed to think better of it. They hurried up the streets, the Grangers shaking with fright and Mrs. Weasley beside herself with fury. "A fine example to set your children, brawling in public! What Gilderoy Lockhart must have thought!" "Oh, he was pleased," said Fred. "Didn't you hear him as we were leaving? He was asking that bloke from the Daily Prophet if he'd been able to work into the fight for his report. He said it was all publicity." But it was a subdued group who headed back to the fireside in the leaky cauldron, where Harry, the Weasleys, and all of their shopping would be traveling back to the Burrow, using Floo powder. They said goodbye to the Grangers, who were leaving the pub for the Muggle Street on the other side. Mr. Weasley started to ask them how the bus stop worked, but quickly stopped at the look on Mrs. Weasley's face. Harry took off his glasses and put them safely in his pocket before helping himself to Floo powder. It definitely wasn't his favorite way to travel. And that's the end of our chapter. I love how fascinated Mr. Weasley is with muggles. I think it's adorable. Our next chapter, which we'll start tomorrow, is called The Whomping Willow. What could that be? We'll have to find out tomorrow. Alrighty, y'all. Have a lovely day today. Bye.